All right. W.E.B. Du Bois. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. I'm going to discuss a research paper I am setting up for an assignment in my transatlantic history class. So this is less of a biography. It's more practice for me developing the thought for this research paper and offering some good Du Bois information for you guys. So the focus is going to be more so on the transatlantic element to his legacy. Now, again, transatlantic meaning the movement across the Atlantic Ocean. And this can be either him physically or his ideas. And one thing that I had to do, I aligned it with two books. One that was about, both actually talking about the African diaspora, which is the movement of Africans throughout the world. And the link that exists or does not exist between these spread out people. You have a Jewish diaspora, Italian diaspora, as people moved out around the world from their native land. So what I'm looking at that actually makes it transatlantic is Du Bois's crossing the Atlantic. So some things that he did in the United States won't be covered in this because particularly we're talking about transatlantic things. Now, number one, grew up in Massachusetts, from a very racially tolerant area, and did not really experience racism until he went to Fisk. And that was where, you know, the whole, hey, wait a minute, this ain't right started. And he did graduate work in Berlin, Germany. And that was atypical for black people at that time. Now there he studied with obviously world minds, picked up a worldview, and it strengthened him. So this is the first transatlantic experience. It strengthened him because he saw something outside of what the United States was. So a lot of black people, even today, accept our place in society because that's the only thing that we know. And anything that is common becomes acceptable. If I don't know a situation where black people are treated equally, I will accept the situation of inequality. Well, in traveling, not only was he in Berlin, but he traveled Europe extensively. And he saw a world with white people that didn't treat black people with the cruelty and just hatefulness that American whites did. So in returning was the first black person to graduate from Harvard. That was one of his major issues, you know, to address, because he saw this doesn't match. This is not how it is. And that was how culturally it was taught, is that this is the role of the black person, not this is how we do it here, but this is what black people were. This is what Africa was. This is what everything was. And he's like, no, I've seen it. It's not like that. So he comes back. So first he goes on an educational transatlantic experience where he travels through Europe. He goes to Europe, and now he is influenced by Europe and comes back. And as he comes back, he's bringing back with him some of these European ideals to the United States. Now, of course, he was one of the greatest minds of our time. I mean, all of us can go to Europe and won't come back with the type of intelligence or accomplishments that, he had. So he comes back and is not offered a lot of the jobs of the scholars of the time because he's black. But his work was dealing with history. It was dealing with politics, and it dealt with sociology. And even most of his accolades were posthumously. He was not given the credit for the type of work that is a credit to him now in sociology, not just civil rights. A lot of the 1964 Civil Rights Bill included a lot of the things that he had been fighting for a while. He was very anti-war. So the Korean War, World War I, World War II, he was not supportive of those wars. He did not want to fight against China. He did not want to fight against Japan because he felt that those were people of color who had become free of white imperialism. And he did not want to attack people of color. So a lot of his work was in India. A lot of his work was in China. Now, these are his... One, he traveled to these places. And two, a lot of his work was received and utilized in these areas, which is why he was invited to them. So his work was not just Pan-Africanism, which that was one of the social groups that he did subscribe to, along with socialism and communism. He had obviously influenced in Germany, influenced China, Japan, India, Africa. And then he went back in his later life and visited Nazi Germany. And there were things that he liked. And I think a lot of his positions came by how he was treated. And I think to some degree he would lose the fact that he was W.E.B. Du Bois because he was not being given the credit as to who he was. And he figured, well, if you're treating me good, you'll treat all black folks good. But even politically, he backed a lot of politicians that promised that they were going to service the black agenda for, his influence. And that didn't come out. So I think a lot of his politics kind of twist and turn due to thinking if people treated him well, that they would treat blacks well. So again, to review the transatlantic portion, to not miss the point, because there's just so many things to unpack when you're dealing with a person who's had a life like he had. The first was his influence of going for education, the information he brought back from Germany and Europe. I believe it was on 3 occasions he made world tours visiting Germany, China, Africa, India, and Japan. Those exchanges of his work, of the newspapers and pamphlets that he produced and edited either through the NAACP or otherwise, that circulated internationally, all of those things were transatlantic activity. And this research paper is designed to show his life from a transatlantic perspective. In this year, he crossed, came back. This year, crossed, came back. He was invited this year, could not go because the United States has taken his passport because he had registered with the Communist Party. All of these different things showing just the whole communist influence from him going to the Soviet Union. All of these things being transatlantic activity between W.E.B. Du Bois and his legacy. So what I would challenge researchers to do, especially when you're going to do a transatlantic study or a transatlantic class, is to take Martin Luther King and remove yourself from all the things that he did domestically and do a transatlantic study of what he affected so you can see the breadth of his influence. Looks like we're going to have to do a part 2 to this.